there was a very interesting story that was published in Variety this week called Toxic Fandom, How Hollywood is Battling Fans Who Are Just Out for Blood, from social media boot camps to superfan focus groups. This story comes from Adam B. Very, writing for Variety.com. Some fascinating stuff in this piece. Basically, we now understand that fans can often be toxic. And this piece does a good job of contextualizing it by saying, hey, by the way, it's actually a relatively small percentage of fans that are the most toxic. Most people are casual fans and don't really care that much, and they're not the ones that are creating the problem. So it does do a good job of contextualizing that. That said, toxic fans are creating a lot of problems in the sense that they're harassing people involved in TV shows and doing other negative things, sending death threats to people for daring to be a certain race or gender or sexual orientation. And it's making it increasingly difficult to make and work on these shows that are part of beloved IP and that are massive properties. In this story, there are some fairly concerning trends that are noted. So here's one that got a lot of attention online. Quote, those who did talk with Variety all agreed the best defense is to avoid provoking fandoms in the first place. In addition to standard focus group testing, studios will assemble a specialized cluster of superfans to assess possible marketing materials for any major franchise project. They're very vocal, says the studio exec. They'll just tell us, if you do that, fans are going to retaliate. These groups have even led studios to alter the projects. If it's early enough and the movie isn't finished yet, we can make those kinds of changes, end quote. Patrick Klepek, I think this sucks. What about you?
I think there's a version of this that is the version that I saw online, which is this is apocalyptic to art. This is allowing fans to dictate the creations of work in a way that is not going to lead to better art.
And let me just say, I have nothing against assembling the super fans to be like, what are people going to say about this? Like, that's just useful intel. The part that's the concern is letting that actually influence what gets made or how it gets made.
But what does that mean, right? So, like, so the reason I did not respond to this particularly with much fire was like, this happens in video games all the time. Like, video games will have like I don't know, the term is not used fan, but like a council of like folks who are like highly visible or well in tuned in the community that will like get access to early features of a game. Or when they remade Dead Space, like a beloved game from the last 20 years, there was like a fan council of Dead Space community members that were brought in extremely early to be seen. Like, this is how we're kind of reshaping the game. This is what it's looking like. This is how the combat feels. And essentially, we're using fans as a form of consulting in the same way that films, video games, all forms of media already hire consulting firms. And those consulting firms are usually just filled with people who are critics or fans, then turned in their criticism or fandom into a commercial enterprise that they just now call consulting. And so there's a world where this is weaponized in a way to sand off any like sharp edges on any piece of mainstream consumer work. It is also possible that like it's just a different form of stuff that's already happening, which is you're just getting a highly specific form of a consulting group from a fandom that like is going to provide you feedback on something that you're doing. There's all sorts of ways it can go wrong, but I just see this done in video games so often that it did not raise my ire necessarily. That if you got a collection of people that it depends on who you're pulling from, right? Like like what it means to pull from fans to influence a work depends on the fans that you're pulling. If you're pulling a diverse, interesting group, like intersectional of the fandom that can provide you insight in how the community might react, I would probably be doing that in Star Wars. If like, given the way the response has happened and like the culture wars happens with things like the Acolyte, like, hey, people in that community might already be able to tell you like, hey, this is going to like set off like a landmine with the kinds of folks that are going to go off the cast members in your group. So there's ways that this doesn't bother me. And I just, the tone that specific section kind of went off with, I think shows the most bad faith interpretation of how that could work. And it's definitely possible. It's Hollywood. It's definitely possible that could be the version that goes out. I just didn't necessarily interpret that as the only version of what this means.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I have a few reactions to what you said. Number one, I believe video games are art. I also think video games are a different medium than film, and I think there is probably uh, this idea that people have of filmmaking, including myself, probably my bias expressed in what I was saying earlier about like that. Something like a movie or a TV show comes out of a someone's vision or a group of people's vision for something, right? And to have that be influenced by the most toxic elements of the fandom feels wrong to me. And I would argue like a video game could be different because like a video game is something where people need to be able to physically play it for it to, to be received well. And getting that kind of feedback. I know people get all kinds of different feedback, gameplay, story wise, et cetera, et cetera. How are the characters looking and sounding and feeling? Like all that kind of feedback comes out in the kind of gaming focus group version of this. But I think that you're right. Probably like in the most generous reading of this, it's the most generous reading is like, hey, we're gonna make it so that we're gonna make it so that Oswald Cobblepot is renamed Cobb in the show, right? Like, what do you think? Was like, I know this Patrick Klepek guy. He's gonna be really peeved about that. And they're like, oh well, we'll factor that into the decision, and that's fine. Like that's whatever. It's like it's good to have that information. And then there's another version of this that's like, we're gonna cast a black elf, and somebody's like, well, people are gonna be pissed. And it's like, well, I don't really think we should listen to those people. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, it just depends. Like, how is that information being used, right? Like, if the people you've assembled is like, if you cast the black elf, like, hey, like, because we know this fandom, like, this is going to cause a reaction. Like, this is like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but like,
right, yeah.
Part of what's in this story is like incapable of necessarily knowing where like ire from fandom is going to come from, and obviously this is a lot like. If you have a better sense of where the toxic fandom is going to attack, in theory, that could help you better prepare the actors, like the production, to deal with those like there's a version of this which is like, hey man, like this fandom is pretty racist. Like you should be ready for the fact that they're going to be racist if you make this character. And like, that doesn't mean you don't make the character, but there is a world where you're better. Like,
hey, that's literally how I started this. I said, if it's just getting intel, I completely support. If it's like, oh well, then we're not going to do that anymore, then like I don't support. But at the end of the day, I do want to acknowledge, as we just saw in the show The Franchise, like a show gets made as a result of like 89 different decisions. Like somebody gets cast as a result of 89 different decisions.
It's all compromised. It's compromised all the way down.
Right. Yeah. That's right. So it's like, I think, that's something you're pointing to, Patrick, is like, hey, it's not like this is the one trump card that's going to like completely destroy a project.
The studio notes, like they're fine, but like the fans, you know what I mean?
Right?
So
it's
just
exactly. Yeah. It's just another kind of compromise that people need to make. That said, let's talk about something else that this piece points to. Quote, several studio insiders say they often put their talent through a social media boot camp. In some cases, when a character is intentionally challenging a franchise's status quo, studios will, with the actor's permission, take over their social media accounts entirely. When things get really bad, especially involving threats of violence, security firms will scrub talent information from the internet to protect them from doxing. End quote. I want to say, actually, I think it's a shame that any of that's necessary, but I actually think that's all very smart. Like, I think that's actually good that happens. Which is why, literally this week, I was a little dismayed to see Jodie Turner-Smith's comments about The Acolyte. This is the headline from Variety, which is actually reblogging a article from Glamour. The Acolyte star Jodie Turner-Smith says Disney can't stay silent when actors are getting effing dogpiled on the internet with racism and bullshit by toxic fans. And she said this thing, and it really stuck with me. She said this, okay? She says, it's disappointing to feel like your studio is not having your back in a very public-facing way. They've got to stop doing this thing where they don't say anything when people are getting fucking dogpiled on the internet with racism bullshit. It's just not fair to not say anything. It's really unfair, end quote. It really, like, stuck with me, that she's like, I think, like, obviously she was on The Acolyte. Obviously, The Acolyte got criticized for reasons beyond the artistically valid reasons that we had for not liking the show. And she is complaining that she says here, continues, quote, "It would be nice if the people that have all the money were showing their support and putting their feet down. Say this is unacceptable. You're not a fan if you do this. Make a really big statement and just see if any money leaves. I bet you it won't, because people of color, especially black people, make up a very large percentage of buying power. They might find that it's actually more lucrative for them, but everyone's using woke like it's a dirty word," end quote. So that's Jodie Turner-Smith, who played one of the major characters in The Acolyte, expressing dismay at how Disney didn't have Amandla Stenberg's back as she faced racism and online harassment for simply being cast in Star Wars. Again, reading here from Variety. So anyway, Patrick Klepek, I found this to be like a really fascinating dichotomy where this piece is like, oh, they'll do all these things like take over the social media and scrub the social media and all this stuff. And then reading Jodie Turner-Smith's interview where she's like, the reality is they're not doing any of that shit, or at least they didn't for her, or in the case of The Acolyte. And I'm just curious what you made of any of that. You know, what was your reaction?
I have to imagine to some degree, like giving up social media accounts is going to be like a conversation with the person involved. I think a little bit more of what she seems to be getting at is something that Disney did do with the Obi-Wan show, which was to put out a very public statement from the official Star Wars account after one of the actors there was being dogpiled. And so Star Wars put out an account that said there are more than 20 million sentient species in the Star Wars galaxy. Don't choose to be a racist. They also had Ewan McGregor come out with a very public video that was clearly...
the thing is, did they ? I mean, I think there's been a lot of speculation that like he did that of his own volition.
Hard to say. Like all I can do is show that it was at least in proximity to one another, right? Like the statement happens alongside the video, whether it was coordinated by Disney. You know, I don't have the insight to say, but part of what she's getting at here.
The one thing I'll say before is like, I think it's possible. I don't remember the order in which those things happened. I think it's possible the causality was in the other direction, where Ewan McGregor goes live on his Instagram or whatever unilaterally, and then like the company feels like it needs to respond. You know, that would be giving them much less credit than your construct implies in that situation.
I actually sort of don't care about the order or like who ordered what, but it's public. It's very public denouncing statements of the culture and the toxic parts of the fandom. So like, however it happened, I can hand wave away, because I think what she's really getting at is like, I don't need you to delete the comments on my Instagram account. Like, I can handle that. What I need you to do is publicly denounce the audience so they don't feel empowered, especially in light of the cancellation, right? That was the moment, especially for Disney to step up and say something, because you and I, you know, walking this fine line of, I actually understand why this show is not getting a second season. I wish it was differently. I think there could have, you know, all the stuff that we talked about, go listen to our podcast. We try to have like very nuanced conversations, understanding the kind of culture war that was also surrounding this show and surround Star Wars in general. But you had to have known that there was going to be a like, go woke, go broke, you know, sort of sentiment alongside a legitimate cancellation for an expensive production that just did not have the numbers to back it up to move forward. But that was also the moment to be like, to say yes, but, and then denounce, you know, to show publicly the support you have for the creatives and how you're like going to continue to do stuff like, hey, we canceled this, but like the Acolyte's not moving forward, but work like this will remain central to the future of Star Wars. And you know what I mean? Like it's performative, but that's what she's asking for. Like she's asking, like the performative stuff matters. Like it's important. It's deflective. It moves the spotlight away from these individual actors and creatives to the big corporation that can absorb like the damage, like a Death Star. Like take it, be the shield. Like that's what she's asking them to do. And so these mechanisms being in place are important. I'm glad they exist. But I can also imagine a situation where it's like, get away. Like I'm handling my social media. Like I'll handle that. Go play defensive in public and like say something in support of all the people that you put faith in for many years until it didn't perform on Disney Plus. And I can see from their perspective, like we made a show, like it's your job to market and sell it. Like not like, so then also protect the people that you gave all this money, time, and trust to. So I think that's what was really lacking here, was a sense from Disney of standing up, especially knowing the wave of criticism and frankly, celebration that was going to come as a result of the decision to not move forward with the Acolyte. And that was completely lacking.
Yeah, I completely agree. So essentially the takeaway from this piece is, okay, hopefully the worst fans aren't influencing the art we see too much.
Yes.
That's my feeling.
Agreed.
And then the other thing is, like, studios still have some ways to go when it comes to taming toxic fans. And at least that's the sense I got from Jodie Turner-Smith's interview with Glamour magazine. And like reading this piece, I'm like, oh yes, the studios are getting smart about it. Like they're doing it. But then it's like when you read this interview, it's like, well, there's still some more stuff they could do. And I hope they do proceed along those paths. That said, it's. I will say what is nice is that they are aware of the stuff that's going on. They're not just like literally unaware. They know that it's happening. And they are starting to get a handle on some ways to fight it. And that, I think, should be saluted. But still more to do. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.